Welcome to this video on the Consumer Price Index. You're going to want to have page 42 from your packet available, the one that has the chart for all the CPI's values, because you'll need that. So just a refresher, when we want to solve problems using Consumer Price Index is when we are comparing two time periods. It might be a month and a year, but it definitely has to be at least 2 years. I always put the money on top and our CPI values, and this is what we get from page 42 in your packet. So that's kind of just the basis for setting up proportions, and we're going to jump right into some examples. So we are on page 314. This is example number 1. In 1991, the average ticket price for a ticket to a Major League Baseball game was $8.64. If the average ticket price has kept up with inflation, what would you expect it to be in March of 2014? So we have our time periods, right? We're talking about 1991 to March of 2014. So those are my two time periods, 1991 and March of 2014. So when I set up my proportion, right, dollars on top, CPI on the bottom. Well, I know in 1991 that the price of the ticket was $8.64, excuse me, and we're trying to find March of 2014. Now, when I look at my table, I know that in 1991 the annual CPI is 136.2, and March of 2014 was 236.293. And you have to make sure if they give you a month that you use the month. So when we cross multiply, so again, remember, cross multiply and divide, you should end up with a ticket price that is $14.99. This is what the ticket price should be. And it tells us in the problem that the actual ticket price was $27.93. So you can see that the ticket prices have raised faster than inflation because the actual price is higher than what it is expected to be. So in March of 14, it should have only been right around $15 when in actuality it was around $28. And that's quite a big difference. In number 2, the average cost of a wedding rose to $31,000 in 2014. If the cost of a wedding rose at the same rate as inflation, what would you expect the average cost of a wedding to have been in 2000? Okay, so again, time periods, 2014 compared to 2000. Now, we don't have any months, so we are just going to use the annual CPI. So in 2014, we know the cost was $31,000. We do not know the cost in 2000. I look at my table, and I know that in 2014 it was $236.736, and in 2000 it was $172.2. So you might want to just double check with your table, make sure you understand where those numbers are coming from. And then again, we have a proportion, cross multiply and divide. And we know, for one, we can look at our denominator, see how the one over here with 2000 is smaller than 2014. So I know that my answer on the top should be smaller. And it is $22,549.17. So it's still a lot of money. All right, the next one. We have this table, and it says this table shows how much is spent annually on health care. So according to the data provided, has the annual health care cost for a typical American increased slower than, faster than, or at the same rate as inflation? So these are all the actual values, right? Actual values. And we need to know what should it be. So I'm going to go ahead and compare the lowest year, the oldest, whatever you want to call it, to the most current. And we know what the current is, so we're going to pretend for right now that we don't know what this is. And X is what it should be, right? If it stayed with inflation, that's what it should be. And then at the end, we can compare. So we're going to compare, let me change colors here. We're going to compare 2002 to 2014. And I will use, in 2002, I have 9,235 over my CPI of 179.88. I'm trying to figure out what it should be in 2014, and I've got 236.736. So now when I cross multiply, it should be $12,153.97. So this is the expected, or what it should be if it stayed with inflation. Now, if we cover up what it actually is, the actual is 23,215. So because the actual is higher than the expected, that means it grew faster. So if the actual is higher, it grew faster, and that should make sense because it grows at the same rate as inflation. It would be 12,000, but it grew faster than that because it's higher. So we would say, no, it did not keep up with inflation. It was faster than inflation, which seems to be how most things are. They all seem to be growing faster than inflation. In number 4, the average price of a gallon of regular gas from 08 to 15 is given in terms of all the months as well. If it had stayed with the price of inflation, what should it have been in March 2015? So it says use the average price of January 09. So January of 09 is right here. What should it be in March of 15? So notice we're being very specific about what time periods we're using. So this is the actual, and again we're going to have to find the estimated. So I'm using January of 09 and March of 15. So when I set this up, I've got 1.787, and yes, you want to use all of those. The CPI from the table is 211,143. I'm trying to figure out what March should have been, and my CPI is 236.119. So once again, I cross multiply, and it should have been right around $2. This is the expected. If gas would have stayed with inflation, the expected value for March of 15 would have been $2. If you go back to the table and you look at the actual is 248. So, is it higher or lower than our predicted? Well, the actual is higher. So once again, gas, just like the last example about healthcare, gas has grown faster than inflation. The estimate was lower than the actual. All right. Next page, some more CPI, and you're more than welcome to see that, have the problem, hit pause, try it, and then come back and look at the explanation, make sure you know what you're doing here. Twinkies made a comeback in 2013 after Hostess was purchased. So they set the cost of a box of 10 Twinkies at $3.99. If the price of a box increased the rate of inflation, how much would it cost today? Well, if you look at your table, the most current CPI data that you have is May of 15. So that's going to have to be as current as we can get, and we are comparing to 2013. So you'll notice on the left side over here, we are using annual because we are just talking about the year. So the annual CPI is 232,957, and we have a price of Twinkies of $3.99. We're trying to figure out what they would be today, and the May CPI is 237,805. So we cross multiply, and we should end up with an answer of $4.07. And it makes sense, well, it should hopefully, that it's a very small increase because if you compare your CPIs, it's a small increase from 13 to May of 15. So small increase as well in the numerator. Next problem. I finally bought a car in 2014 and I paid $10,400 for the vehicle. If the price of the car increased at the same rate of inflation, how much would I have paid for this in 2006? So in 2014, I bought a car for $10,400. Annual CPI for that one, 236.736. We're comparing that to what would it have been in 2006 if I'd have bought the car 8 years ago. Well, that CPI is 201.6, cross multiply, and it would have cost you $8,856.45. So remember, because all of these are talking about money, we should always be rounding to 2 decimal places. Number 3, the minimum wage in Illinois in 78 was $2.10 an hour. If the minimum wage in Illinois kept up with inflation, what should it be in 2015? We want to use the most recent CPI value, which again would be May. So first, let's figure out what it should be. So we're talking about 1978 to May of 15. And we know it was 210 in 78. So here's our time periods. And our CPI is 65.2. We're trying to figure out what it should be in May at 237.805. Cross multiply, it should be $7.66, and this is in Illinois. So this is the expected. Well, you can see in the problem, current, it's actually 825. So if you think about this, expected compared to the actual, if the actual is higher than the expected, higher than the expected, that means it grew faster. So it grew faster than inflation because the actual is higher than the expected. Another problem, same concept. The average ticket price in 2000 was $5.39, right? We all wish for those days. In 2014, the average price was $8.17. Did it increase faster, slower, at the same rate of inflation? So this is the actual. We need to figure out what would be the expected. So we're comparing 2000 to 2014, right? There's our time periods. So in 2000, $5.39 with a CPI of 172.2. What should it be in 2014, right? This is our expected, and our CPI is 236.736. So we cross multiply, and the expected value of the ticket should be 741. The actual is 817, and perhaps you're seeing a trend, but again, the actual is higher than the expected, and therefore it grew faster than inflation. Number 5. The first Bluray player in 2006 was almost $1,000. If they increased with inflation, how much would it be today? So 2006, and again, because it's today, we're going to use May of 15. So our proportion, $999.99. 2006 had a CPI of 201.6. May of 15 is an unknown, but we have our 237.805. If Bluray players had stayed with inflation after you cross multiply and divide, they should cost $1,179.58. Now, I do not own a Bluray player. I've never purchased one for anyone else either, but I don't think they're that much because I know people with Bluray players, and I know that they would not have spent over $1,000 on these things. So I feel like they have come down in price, which is, I guess, different than most things we've talked about, but I think that's true, and if it's not, will somebody please tell me, because I really am clueless on the whole Bluray players. Number 6, the average cost of an adult funeral is given in this table. Has the cost increased more or less or at the same rate of inflation? So once again, I'm not going to use 1975 because it's not on our table, if you notice that. So I'm going to use 1980. And again, this is an actual, so I'm going to pretend I don't know this, and I'm going to find the estimate. So I'm going to compare 1980 to 2012, and I will use $1,809. Here, let me put our time period. I don't want those numbers to be confused with our proportion. So 1809 was the cost of the funeral in 1980. What should it be, right? Again, this is expected for 2012. 2012's got its CPI of 229.594. When I cross multiply, my expected value of a funeral in 2012 should have been $5,040.48. Well, if we uncover the actual, and let's change colors for effect, the actual price is $7,045. So once again, the actual is higher than the expected, right? Because this is the expected down here, and therefore it has grown faster than inflation, which has been pretty much a consensus. And the last problem here, we've got the salaries of Congress over a period of time, and once again, did it keep up with inflation? So I'm going to go with 1982 compared to, well, and look at this. This is a range, so I don't want to use that one. I want to use actual data. I'm going to use 2006. So if I compare 1982 to 2006 as my time period, okay, well, let's write our proportion. We've got 69,800 over 96.5, and X over in 2006, 201.6. So the expected Congress salary in 2006 should have been $145,820.52. But you can see that the actual was $165,200. Again, the actual is higher than the expected, and therefore it grew faster than inflation, which was the consensus for all of these problems. So hopefully going through a few more CPI problems is helpful, and let me know if I can do anything else. Thanks.